Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Factory. On the floor with me today, I've got Lou Iovino. Welcome aboard, Lou.
Hello.
Hi there. It's a momentary lapse of reason. Although you seem like a pretty reasonable, actually very productive, creative person. You've got two standalone speculative fiction books. You've got two speculative books in a trilogy with the third coming out. You've written comic books, and you are an ad agency guy where our paths have crossed. Just for the spirit of transparency, we both know and love the bulldog toting Brian. Can we mention him by name? Is that okay?
Sure. I think you'd be fine with that.
All right. We got to give him an homage. Have you met his bulldogs?
No, I haven't met his bulldogs. I think I need.
I think that is lacking. I think if anything comes out of our conversation today, you have to hang with his sexy English bulldog. What got you into writing, Lou? I'm a newbie science fiction writer. I published this June, my first science fiction. I too am writing.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's a multiverse saga. I got my own spin on it. And I've been wanting to do that forever. I read Isaac Asimov as a kid. His not just the science fiction, but his essays. I was so into it, and it took me a while, but I think I finally got my chops, and I love it. So, what got you into speculative fiction, given your background?
Yeah. I think it was just growing up as a reader. I was fascinated the day I kind of like came to the realization that people make these comic books and people write these paperbacks that I'm toting around all over the place, and wow, they can actually make a living at that. That seems amazing. Why not do that? But then, yeah, exactly. But then, of course, life gets in the way, and you kind of put it on the shelf for a little while and tinker. And I think it was when I, got into my late 30s, I kind of came to the realization, like, you're going to do it now, or you're never going to do it. So I gave myself a 10-year window starting when I turned 40. I was like, I'm going to give it a go because, this is my shot. And if it doesn't work, then at least I can go to my grave saying I tried, versus never having done it. So I kind of committed to that. And then, all through my 40s, I did a lot of work. I produced a lot of stuff. I wrote for comics for a long time and did some screenwriting for a few years, and as you mentioned, written a few novels. So so the 10 years came and went, and I thought, well, shit, might as well keep going. And I have.
You beat me to the punch. I'm cracking 6-0, and I've been aspirational about my creative writing too. I've been writing the whole time, but to your point, life gets in the way, an accidental kid gets in the way, which leads to an accidental family, which leads to an accidental career. And my kids finally got to the point where they could put their pants on by themselves, get out the door, actually have a job. So that freed me up a little bit to be fiscally irresponsible, which is sometimes what you need to be in order to really dedicate yourself to a craft. So the last 3 years, I think I've been going nuts. I have been working, but, insufficiently really to be a responsible adult. And instead, I've been a kid again, just cranking content constantly. And the sci-fi book is staking the claim in what I always wanted to do. So it's terrific. You started when you cracked 40. And what was your first sojourn? What was your first sojourn into doing what you always wanted to do?
Yeah. So the first thing that went out into the world, other than the stuff you write and keep in a drawer, the first thing that went out into the world is a buddy of mine and I wrote a 10-issue graphic novel called The Last West, and completely wanted complete end-to-end control of it, because we figured, like, if we're going to do it, you might as well do it. So we hired an artist and started producing the issues, put it out on Kickstarter, got it funded through Kickstarter, and then sure enough, a couple issues in, ended up landing a distribution partner with a publisher. And that was the first thing that kind of went out into the world, was this graphic novel. And it was great. I mean, it was a fantastic experience and led to a bunch of, maybe 5-6 years of, solid comic book writing for mainly for one company on a bunch of their titles. So that was my first sojourn as a comic book author, and that made sense because I grew up on comics. I mean, all through my late teens and into my adulthood, I was, and still am to a certain degree, although not so much in recent years, a big reader of comics and graphic novels. So that was a good start for me.
So how did you collaborate? He was a co-writer with you on the project? Did he storyboard the thing for you, with you? How did that work out?
He was a co-writer and co-creator. I mean, he and I, we were both working on, here we go back to yours and my, our humble careers. He and I were both working up in Manhattan. We both live in the South Jersey, Philly region, and we're working in Manhattan at an ad agency up there. And believe it or not, used to drive in to the city. So we had all this time in the car commuting back and forth to and from Manhattan. And, we just used the time and came up with this idea for this story. So we collaborated on every stage of the manuscript. He would take the lead as a author in an issue, and I would take an opposing issue, and then we'd flip them, and just created this massive, this massive tome of what became the 10 issues. Auditioned and hired an artist, because neither of us are artists, so you have to. That's the unfortunate part about trying to break into comics, is that when you try to do it and then sell your property, they want to see pages, they want to see the art. Comics are a visual medium, so we had to audition and hire an artist and pay that artist out of pocket, and audition and hire a colorist and pay that colorist out of pocket, thus the Kickstarter. So, and same thing with the lettering. So, it's a very involved process. It was great. It was great.
It's difficult collaborating.
Yeah, I mean, we've been friends for a very, very long time. Yeah, it's tough depending on the person. I mean, we've been friends for a very long time, so it wasn't too difficult. And in fact, he and I remained writing partners, doing some screenwriting together as well. So that hasn't spanned into novels, but for comics,
that's a rare gift. I just had Blake and Sherry Shimshock on. They're speculative fiction writers too, and they're a married couple. They've known each other since the mid '80s, and back in 2006 or so, she had a sick day, and he had a screenplay, and she's like, let me look at that. And then they just hit it off. It sparked, and they've got a number of books in the Derek Fade series, and they keep cranking it out. And
it's amazing.
They're a nice team. It's great to see when people do work together.
Good for them. That's amazing.
It doesn't always work out, right? So you have the comic that went out, and then how'd you do the shift into full-blown novel writing? I've discovered in my brief but lively career here that learning how to actually write a book is a lift. There's a lot that goes into a complete novel. It's not easy.
Yeah, and at least in my weird way, I think the way I progressed up to the novel, which was, kind of like the white whale, even throughout all the years of writing comics and then moving into screenwriting, the novel's always hanging out there as at least for me, the ultimate accomplishment is if you could do that. And it took me a while to feel like I was ready for it. I will say that I think working in comics and then doing screenwriting was really, really useful to when I felt I was ready to tackle the novel. There's things and there's skills that you learn in having to crank out those two types of media that do serve when you get to the long form of the novel. Like, for instance, I think in comics, unless people have ever seen like a comic script, they don't really realize, like, the only writing that the audience gets to see that you produce is the dialogue. That's all that's there on the page is the bubbles with the dialogue in it.
Well,
But
sometimes there's little narrative boxes. You do
yeah,
get that a little bit, a
yeah,
little.
little narrative joiners, yeah, for sure. Not much on the page, and yet the comic manuscript is, it's a conversation between the writer and the art team, so the majority of the writing that you do there is breaking down the scene panel by panel, having to describe that for the artist. So it really teaches you a lot about plotting. It really teaches you a lot about how to uh, write words that ultimately people can see in their brain. And in the case of comics, they can see them literally in the artist's depiction of the thing. So, but the majority of the writing, 90% of the writing disappears when the product comes out because it's just between you and the art team. So that's really interesting. So
You're prompting the artist, and now with AI, and it's blasphemy for a lot of the professional artists who've been flourishing for a long time, have careers,
mhm,
and now people are
yeah,
they're dollying their art, and they're now
yeah.
what is it, Mid Journey, and there's a
Mhm.
host of software packages where it's DIY even for graphic art.
Yeah, and this is really interesting. I mean, I haven't written for comics for a while, but I've been curious since AI really came about because, one of the obstacles, like I said, for anybody wanting to jump into comics, if they're not uh, an artist writer, is you have to find artists that are either willing to work for free, or if you want
That's tough.
the premium people who are going to get the attention of the publishers, you got to pay. Yeah, but now I think with tools like Midjourney, you take a guy like me who can write a script. I Instead of writing all of those prompts and really laboring over trying to explain and depict how I want the visuals to come to life on the page, I can just do that to Midjourney and maybe it'll spit out the panels. I don't know. I haven't done it, but that's my suspicion. Um, but it focuses your attention on dialogue. Like when you write comics, you really gotta learn how to do dialogue, man, because that's the only thing that anybody's gonna see that you made. So it really focuses, it sharpens your attention on how to write compelling dialogue, at least dialogue that's gonna keep people flipping the pages.
Yeah, and a well-written screenplay. Similarly, there's no backstory. There's no
Yeah.
subjective analysis of the circumstance. Basically, there's
Mhm.
just declarative statements that describe what's being seen and the action that's
Mhm.
taking place between the characters. And there's dialogue. That's it. A play is similar. And that, to your point, is good practice for a novelist, I think. That's good practice.
I think so too. And plotting as well. I mean, you take the typical American comic, it's 22 pages of content, and that usually breaks out between like 6 and 8 scenes. So you're talking two-page scenes. So you got to be really it focuses your attention on being concise, focuses on the dialogue, making sure you hit your beats. So it's plotting, it's dialogue. I mean, like I said, it all served really well when I got to the novel, and then screenwriting too. I think the screenplay, the only difference there is that while you can dismiss mistakes in the description of the panels to the artist, that's never going to be seen by anybody. Um, those descriptions through the screenplay, that's what you're judged on, man. You're judged on you're not only the dialogue that you write for the characters, but also the scene descriptions for the director. Because while comics is an artist medium, films are a director's medium for sure. So that's how you get it across the finish line. So it was an interesting transition from comics into screenwriting, and then ultimately, taking the real plunge into writing into writing long form and tackling the novel. So that's a little bit about the journey, at least that I went on. Not conventional, but it was mine.
And how did you zero in on the concept that ended up being your flagship novel? Was it something that was brewing in your head for a while? Did it erupt when you finally figured out that you were ready to take on a novel? How did that come to be?
Yeah, yeah. So the debut novel, not surprising, I had originally envisioned as a comic, a graphic novel. In fact, I had drawn up the proposal and pitched it around to a bunch of publishers as a graphic novel, had an artist on board, the whole bit. And it never really found a home as a comic, but I couldn't let the idea go. So after 3 or 4 tortured years of writing for Hollywood, or at least trying to write for Hollywood, and when I decided, like, the idea lingered, so I went back to it, and then I had the kernels of the idea for my debut, and I just got to work, and I'll be honest, like, the pandemic was a big piece of that, because this thing that I had really kind of fleshed out as a potential graphic novel project I had sitting there, but I didn't have the time to really take the plunge. And all things being equal, you lose an hour on each end of your day commuting, and then an hour at lunch. You got 3 hours a day back in your life during the pandemic that you could dedicate, and that's what I did. I thought to myself, like, if I get out of this and realize I wasted all of that time on Facebook or whatever the hell it was, then I'd be really pissed at myself. So I didn't let that happen. And so it was having the idea sitting there and lingering in my brain for years and years. And then the opportunity that the pandemic presented, that I just really buckled down and got that debut novel out of my system.
How did it compare to your expectations? We all have a mental image of the book we think we want to or can or should write. And then there's usually a pronounced delta between the words on the page and the vivid emotion and visualization that we got going on in our head. How'd you feel about it when you finally got it out the door?
Yeah. It really expanded. I mean, what I thought was a fully wrought idea when it was going to be a comic or a graphic novel, I realized only was just the beginnings of the larger story. And I think that was just born out of necessity. It was born out of the fact that you're writing a novel, and what I tell people all the time is the difference between that and all the other things I'd written is that all the words matter. Every one of them matters. People are going to see each and every one of them, so you have to be very particular. But also, like, ideas that you think are this big actually end up being only this big when you execute them. So you have to fill in the pieces. So I think that the story that I had in my brain, it just really grew, and in a good way. It really fleshed out. New characters emerged that I had never imagined before. And the story, like the setting, everything just kind of fell into place when I really just started dedicating myself to the notion of the premise of that novel.
How'd you go about releasing it to the world? One of the indie writers' dilemmas is we might be good at creating the content, but distribution is always such a challenge, especially with different parts of the brain at work. Yeah. You got rhythm guitar players, you got lead guitar players. There aren't too many who can do both well. And it's hard to find writers who can actually market themselves with as much skill as they execute. And oftentimes you have the opposite, where folks are terrific at marketing and they suck as a writer, but they get it out there. They're able to connect and build an audience.
Yeah, this was, this is, as you say, for a lot of people, a big dilemma. Like, do you go the traditional route and try to query agents? Because, you can't, unless you go with like real indie presses, small presses and stuff like that. If you want to get a book traditionally published with one of the big five, it's a walled garden. You can't even get in if you're unagented. So the first step is finding an agent. And that is almost harder than getting an actual publishing deal. Is these people are so overwhelmed with queries. So, as I was getting close to finishing the book, and I was grappling with this, I wasn't as, I'll be honest, because of my experience writing in comics, which is a very indie kind of spirited endeavor, and then working on screenplays as as kind of a gun for hire screenwriter. I wasn't afraid of it. And then, as you mentioned, I work in the field of advertising and have for 25 plus years. So the marketing side of it wasn't that scary to me either. But it was really when I found Hugh Howey the creator of the Silo trilogy, which is kicking ass on Apple. And like when I found him and listened to him describe his indie journey and why he decided to be an indie writer versus and turning down, 7-figure publishing deals on his side, not to say that for 1 second I believed I could be a Hugh Howey or that I'd be as successful, but it really turned my eyes, or it opened my eyes to the possibilities of indie publishing. And honestly, Mookie, like I didn't want to waste a bunch of time soliciting people. Like I had this thing, I was excited. I was, like I said, I was in part of this 10-year journey that I'd set for myself. I wanted people to read it, and I didn't want to take 3 years trying to find an agent and then 2 years getting it to a publisher. That, like, I wanted it out in the world. So I kind of adjusted or I didn't really adjust my expectations. I set my expectations that I'm going to put a couple standalone books out into the world like I've done everything else. And then we'll see what kind of reaction I get. And then maybe down the road, I'll explore, a traditional publishing opportunity. And that's kind of where I am now with the trilogy that I'm in the midst of, or in the last third of. Is because of the attention of my first 2 novels and the attention that book 1 of this trilogy got, I was able to get an agent, and that book is now out on submission to all the publishers. So like it kind of worked out the way I had hopefully plotted it out, which was that, do it the indie route and then see how people react, and if it's meant to go a different way, it will. And that seems to be what's happening right now. I don't know if it's going to be the end of the story, or if it's going to prove that I made the right thing.
Yeah, that's the way to play. How did you get attention as an indie writer, though? So is Lou Iovino, you yourself, and Lou, how did you do it? How did you break through the clutter? Something like 100,000 plus titles are published every year, self-published. And even speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy is super, super crowded.
Yeah. So I did a couple things. One, I'm fortunate because, I'm able to work with some really good partners. So the first thing I did after completing my first novel is I thought, in order to like stand out, I really need a great editor. I need an editor that's going to challenge me, and somebody who works with the type of writers that I admire. So oddly enough, I was, again, back to Hugh Howey. I was listening to a podcast that he did, and he mentioned that, for the Silo trilogy, he had this fantastic writer who always challenged him, and he was wonderful. And he even said that if, people want to know who he is or what he's about, you can look on my website. Well, a podcast was like 7 years old by the time I found it. So I go to Hugh's website, and there's no information on the editor. He's gone to the passage of time. So I went back in the Wayback Machine, and I found an early version of Hugh's website that actually had the guy's email address on
Look
it.
at you doing the ad agency chops. We used to do that all the time for clients, right? Good for you.
Yeah, David Gatewood. I found him. I reached out to him. I had to audition with him because he said, obviously he's a top guy. He works with Hugh and people like A.G. Riddle. Like, he works with some of the top names in sci-fi. So I had to audition with him, and which meant send him some of my writing. He would decide whether or not it was something he wanted to work on. Because can you imagine being an editor getting handed schlock? Like, you don't want to be that kind of work with that kind of a client. So luckily I passed the test, and David's been my editor ever since. I mean, the 4 books that I put out. So I worked with him, and then I hired like a really great cover designer, one of the top folks that work in sci-fi. So I produced a top-notch product, and I think that's got to be one of the first steps. Is if you want to compete with traditionally published sci-fi authors and books, yours has got to compete just literally on the substance, the actual physical product that you put out into the world. So that was step 1, and then step 2 is I tapped into my marketing chops. I did the free giveaways that you do. I ran Facebook ads and Instagram ads and BookBub ads, and slowly over time it just started. I got to the point where it was almost like a zero-sum game. If I would spend $10 a day on advertising, I would generate about $10 in book sales. And I'd up it to 20 and I'd sell $20. Like, so like the ads started paying for themselves in the books, so that I just like slowly over the years as I was working on subsequent stories, I kept it up, and over time I grew a little readership, and I still do that today. It's changing a little bit, with Meta and AI. It's affecting it a little bit, but that's how I've done it thus far. So again, I'm very fortunate because I'm in a position where I can afford to do something like that. Where not a lot of writers are in that position. Dropping a few $1,000s on an editor is just out of the scope for some writers, so they have to rely on other means. I was fortunate I didn't need to do.
The ego challenge beyond just the financial one. Just speaking for myself, I felt that I just wanted to do it. So I did not use an editor. I had my niece do the cover. And I just wanted it like Burger King. I wanted this bad boy to be all me. And I have no regrets. I love the book that I created. And to your point, I didn't have to wait years to tease and negotiate with an agent who would then tease and negotiate with a publisher, and then all the iterations until it finally sees the light of day. And I would feel that the book would probably be unrecognizable to me at that point. So I just felt that writing is equivalent to publishing, and that you're just doing it. And, have I made an impact?
Yeah.
Well, it's all relative, but I would at least at this point not have it any other way. I just want it to be my baby.
Yeah. And you know what, man? I mean, this gets to, I think, a bigger question that we all have to ask, which is like, there's like definitions of success, right? And how do we define our own success? If it's putting out something that's wholly you and people find it and they resonate with it, well, then they're resonating with you. And that's a fantastic definition of success in my book, So I think that's really what it comes down to, after a decade of writing for comics and doing some screenwriting, I wanted, not only did I wanted to bite off the novel, but I was hoping that the audience that I had grown over time would kind of find the novels, and then I could use that as a springboard. So I had a little bit, and like I said, and my ultimate goal was to hopefully write something and then maybe test the waters with traditional publishing. And so I had a little bit of a different objective, which is why I kind of went the route of, getting like a super slick cover designer and stuff like that.
Oh, it's smart. It's smart, expeditious, and it got the results that you're looking for. And to your point, it depends on your KPIs, your key performance indicators when you're starting something, right? So for me, it was all about self-expression and realizing my dream of writing the book I always wanted to read. And that's what I set out to do. I wanted to please myself. And I have been my own harshest critic for a long time. And there's nothing more satisfying to me than to finally overcome my own self-criticism and my own hesitation and my own feeling that the delta between the book I had in my mind and the book that I would finally see published was insurmountable. And it squeezed to the point where I actually did what I always wanted to do. So in that sense, the good news is I already feel completely successful. The downside is that you have an N of one consumer. So, again, to go out there into the world, and we work in marketing, PR, behavioral change. You want people to come your way in the sense of at least acknowledging what you have to offer, and then conversely providing benefit to the world. So it's finding that balance between satisfying oneself through the content itself and satisfying oneself through the satisfaction of others.
I think you nailed it. I think that's really what it ultimately comes down to. If you're not writing for yourself, that's the first. Like for me, my first novel was for me. I mean, wasn't dedicated to me, but perhaps it should have been, because it was for me. It was me. It was exercising this demon that had hung over my life of wanting to write a novel, and like I said, kind of getting the white whale by the tail. So, but then beyond that, then I started, we all start thinking about, okay, what's the follow up and who am I writing this for? And then you get reactions to your first book and you want to listen to that feedback. You want to incorporate it and start writing something that maybe will hit on some of the things that you're hearing from people. And that that just rolls and rolls and rolls. So it becomes, that certainly becomes, it's helpful in the beginning, and then it can become an obstacle to getting words on the page down the road. And that's certainly where I'm kind of at right now. As I'm trying to wrap up a trilogy, it's it's a lot of voices in my head, and I have to try and figure out how to go back and recapture that spirit of the first one.
For me, it was the most immersive, toughest thing I ever did, which was just the 18-hour day of cranking for probably 2 months to just wrap it up. The whole thing was there, it was laid out, and it was a matter of polishing and moving stuff around and making it happen in the way that I saw it. I was matching the vision of the entire book with the book itself. And that was one of the greatest periods in my adult life, where it was unbelievably difficult, yet so rewarding. And it was so meditative and all consuming that it was like doing a Zen retreat on the mountain. It was like Zarathustra coming down after it was done. And it was very satisfying. And I think as a writer and an artist, you can't expect anything more than that. That's a huge win, and everything else is icing on the cake at that point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is its own little definition of success. I can agree with you 100% that when you get into that flow, when the story is just really coming and surprising you, and characters, people don't often understand when I tell them that, like, characters want what they want, and sometimes they do things that you don't want them to do. It sounds weird for people who haven't like been in the trenches and realize that that's not hyperbole. Like, they will do what they want to do, and you don't often have control over it. The story goes where it needs to go.
You're a conduit for their there's a virtual reality construct in your head, and they start becoming autonomous.
Yeah.
And that's the best writing right there. It's organic. It's based on their goals, not necessarily yours. And that's the heart of drama, where you take a very clearly defined character with clearly defined goals and clearly defined obstacles, and you let it play out. That's so much fun.
And you have to, let that happen,
Release it. Tell us a little bit about your content and themes. You've told us about your emotional state and expectations going into writing the first book. And you have a diverse array of setups. For example, the what if scenario that the Earth stops spinning. You have a what if scenario about data mining and privacy. You have these what if counter conditional scenarios. Can you give our listeners a little bit more specificity around your plots, your thinking, your themes, how they tie back to our society, all the goodies of good literature?
Yeah, it's wow. So I do have this like what if kind of thread running through at least some of certainly my comic writing, and then the first couple of novels, for sure. I am very interested in kind of like alternate history or alternate ideology kind of questions. So for the thing that started it all, the graphic novel, The Last West, it was, what if all progress stopped in the 1940s? All, scientific and cultural progress stopped. What might the future today look like? So that was kind of like the spark behind that one. So it was a question of time, and how certain events can affect time. So that was the start of the first one. And then the first novel, Skybound, I wanted to write about the old chestnut of science versus religion. It was a thing that I've been interested in my entire life. So the premise behind that one is one day something appears in the sky. We don't know what it is, but we do know that it stopped the rotation of the planet. And scientists are trying all over the globe to figure out what it is. So you have the science community grappling with what this thing might be, and of course the opposing thought is the religious community seeing it as something very, very different. How do those two things bounce off each other? And then the best way for me to kind of tell that story was through the story of two siblings, one who is a priest and one who happens to be a scientist, and how they grapple with this event on a personal level in their hometown, and how does that, what they're going through, kind of reflect a larger kind of question that people are asking themselves. So that's what I wanted to write about, and it sounds like a big thing to bite off, but when I landed on these two siblings, then the story like kind of really crystallized for me. So that was that. And then the second novel, Data Mining, I mean, I think it's a pretty prescient question, which is around privacy, and can people really know you through your data? So the main character in that one is a data miner, and the premise for that is that at some point we get fed up with the fact that elites can ruin everything for people. So the price you have to pay for being an elite, whether that be a celebrity or a rich person, is you get fitted with what they call a data harvester. You have to wear it. It's like government mandated, and it harvests all your data. And we pay an industry of people called data miners to watch what they're doing. So we have an eye on all of these people that are going to affect all of our lives. So that became the main character of that novel, and we follow her as she's uncovering something pretty sinister happening with one of the people she's in charge of the mining the data for, who happens to be a presidential candidate, which, by the way, made it really hard to advertise that book on Facebook and Instagram, because anything involving the presidents was flagged and as not being allowed to in the metadata. So it made it really tricky.
They thought you were a Russian bot.
Yeah. They thought I was saying stuff about whatever, and I was not. I had to keep responding, no, it's fiction, it's a book, just let the Facebook ad go out, it's fine. And ultimately there's ways of working around it. So you can see how, I mean, those are some of the themes. And then the trilogy that I'm writing now involves stuff that's actually like circumstantially in the news all the time now, which is rare earth elements. 4 or 5 years ago, I found this article about how important rare earth elements are to us, and we don't even realize it. Like, it powers all of our technology, is these metals, and they're in short supply on the planet, and that China controls like 90% of the mining of these elements. So it was a pretty much a slam dunk. That was also a pandemic one, because during the pandemic, I discovered the show Deadliest Catch, and became obsessed with watching these people pull crabs out of the North Atlantic, or the North Sea rather. So I wanted to write a Deadliest Catch in Space story, which is, there's one place where there's lots of rare earth elements, and it's on asteroids. So we just have to figure out how to catch them, and that's basically what the rare earth trilogy that I'm writing now is about. So, but you see it all the time. I mean, that big blow up between our current leader and Zelensky in the Oval Office. It was around the day that they were going to sign the Rare Earths Treaty, and they just last week signed a treaty. Like, we're constantly talking about rare earth elements now. So I'm like, hey, free advertising.
Yeah, it's the punchline of jokes. Rare earths. Even the libertarian magazine, one of my favorites, Reason.com. They had a whole rare earth satire, where it's just, that's the buzzword. If you want a quick rapport, or if you want to insult someone, just rare earth them.
Yeah.
But it was prescient, and it's interesting. How did you and how do you balance character-driven human drama with science fiction speculative world building? Because this is another balancing act. And I've been talking to a lot of authors, and I'm an author, and I've been grappling with that issue too. And obviously it depends on your personality, it depends on your own interests and your own proclivities, but your own taste as well. Yeah. And what I've discovered in my own writing and in appraising some of the works of others is there's a tendency to fetishize technology among us geeks.
Mhm.
And that leads to bad storytelling because the world building gets in the way of the human drama. And it turns into a technical manual or a spec sheet or some fictionalized National Geographic in space. And the characters reduce themselves to cutouts and two-dimensional vehicles for the world to build. And there's no tension. There's no real drama because the author is too busy describing the fanciful gadgetry and futuristic technology. So how did you find your own balance? And do you think you pulled it off? Are you satisfied with your mix?
I am definitely satisfied with my mix, and I'll tell you why. I'm very much a student of Aaron Sorkin and the way he tells stories, and he boils everything down to intention and obstacle, which means it's about characters, right? A character wants something and something is in their way. To me, everything else has to be subservient to that premise, right? Which means I always put character first. I don't mind world building. In fact, I really enjoy it. I really enjoy building the worlds of all of the books that I've written, and even back to the comics. Like it's one of the fun bits of it, of this journey. But to me, it's backdrop, and it has to be backdrop, and cannot get in the way of character. So I'm very much a character forward writer. So that's how I balanced it. And I'll use the example, like, I love Andy Weir. I mean, his I don't know if you read Project Hail Mary, but everybody's going to get to see the film.
The Martian, of course, and now he has a new book, right?
Yeah. So Project Hail Mary is going to be out in theaters soon, which is wonderful. And Andy Weir was a scientist first. So the worlds he builds, everything is grounded in like what we would classify as like hard sci-fi. It's like actually like the principles that he utilizes for how ships fly and how gravity works. Like in Project Hail Mary, he goes through these great pains to explain how the main character, when he's traveling through space, he's in zero gravity, but then he needs to do certain things where he requires gravity. So there's this whole system that he sets up with the ship. It'll spin to create gravity. Like, he goes through all these pains in his storytelling, and it's really, for me, it's really onerous. So now I'm writing a story that takes place in space, and I really grappled with this. And ultimately I decided, well, shit, Star Wars and Star Trek, we never ask about gravity. It's just accepted that we have artificial gravity. So why don't I just do that? So I did. I address it. I address it early in the first book about how gravity works, and then dismiss it, and then it just becomes an accepted thing. So I'm always in my world building looking for things that I get for free, right? And when it comes to space books, most people understand artificial gravity, even though it's scientifically really hard to generate.
That is the most distant technology. If we're looking at really the dichotomy between quantum mechanics and general relativity, and if you really think that gravity isn't even a force, but the bending of the space-time continuum, or even something else, this idea of artificial gravity is the most bullshit scientific trope from a technical point of view. But to your point, it's instantaneously dismissible because it's very intuitive, and we've seen it countless times. And it's like, oh, yeah, sure, you just flick a switch and gravity gets activated. No problem. And it circumvents all the difficulties of falling into the well of world building, because if you don't initiate artificial gravity, then you do need a spinning station, and then you encounter endless logistical problems with your characters, which you have to keep navigating around and explaining and getting through. Same thing with faster than light travel. FTL. FTL is likely just as bullshit as artificial gravity, and perhaps for many of the same reasons. So science fiction writers, artificial
Absolutely.
gravity and faster than light travel, no problem. Because then you eliminate all the
Hmm.
difficulties of a universe, even a galaxy, which is so incomprehensibly
Yeah.
ginormous. You get rid of the time dilation
Hmm.
problem. You get rid of all of the
Yeah.
obstacles for writing in space, about
Mm.
space.
Yeah. And I don't have anything against. I don't have anything against people who want to write that hard, scientific, based fiction. I really don't. And quite frankly, I admire it. It's just not me. And it's funny because as a sci-fi writer, you encounter that certainly every once in a while. You're not going to make everybody. This really becomes a question of your reader, right? Too. Like I write grounded sci-fi. I write stuff that is pretty practical, and like I said, I focus mostly on character. But every once in a while, you'll like just really piss off some reader because you got some little nuance of the science wrong, and that'll happen, and I feel badly maybe, but it really just shows you that the book's not for that person. Like if that's what they're looking for, there's other places to find that. That's not what I do. I always feel bad if I get something wrong, but
Who are you
yeah.
trying to appease? Yeah, and you can't
Right.
make everybody happy.
Yeah.
And to your point, the one geek who
Right.
loses his mind over a technical detail, well, if you obsess over that technical detail, you lose 10 times that audience by folks who really don't care at all. And they would rather you just
Yeah.
illustrate a compelling character with real obstacles that he needs to
Yeah.
overcome. So there you go. I am arguably
Right.
guilty of what I call over the head and between the legs. So my science fiction novel is super hard science. So I go all the way with cellular automata, with Boltzmann brains, with even some of the new tech,
Hmm.
communications tech. I go nuts with Bitcoin, and I
Yeah.
get very, very granular in a stylistic way. And I do this on purpose for a number of reasons. One, I love that kind of geekery.
Yeah.
And I think it provided amazing counterpoint to the between the legs part, which is the anti-hero of my novel is a hustler, con man, Gen Z, Zoomer, BAP kind of guy, Bronze Age pervert, moron. And I love that hot and
Huh.
spicy, sweet and sour juxtaposition between the super hard science and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And if there's any way to describe my
Yeah. It's awesome.
novel,
Yeah.
it's that kind of mix. And sometimes they're apart, and sometimes they wash together. And as a writer, I just got such a
Yeah.
kick out of it. Now, the question becomes folks are like, WTF? Like, what exactly is going on? Because it's unconventional and it's extreme. But you pays your money and makes your
Yeah.
choice. I find it consistent. I find it stylistically, it's Douglas Adams meets William Gibson meets Andy Weir. And if you want to sell the screenplay that way, go for it. But it makes me so happy. I just loved writing it,
Yeah.
and I would have it no other way. So
Yeah.
it's fun as hell. And I think if you've got that, then
It'll find its audience.
yeah. And sometimes writers create their own audiences. So if you're doing something wacky and
Yeah.
unconventional, it might take a while to break through. But once people get it, even a niche audience, then you've
Mhm.
created your own target. And that could be fun in and of itself too.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. No, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, there's a million different ways, a million different flavors of science fiction for sure. Uh, well, pretty much all genres, but science fiction is unique because it does have these little pockets of fandom that we have to either ignore completely because we can't put a finger on them, or right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Yeah.
Have you thought about content repurposing now that you're going to finish the trilogy? And tell us for just context about the trilogy. You mentioned, of course, the Day the Earth Stood Still, which was your flagship novel. You mentioned the Data Privacy and Mining second novel. Tell us a little bit more about the trilogy, the arc of the story. You don't have to give away spoilers, but Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. How does it shake
Yeah.
out with the bonus points here of the possibility of it, as I'm sure you would love to see, a Netflix miniseries, or even going back to your roots, a graphic novel of this trilogy would be fun.
Yeah, and this also is a thing that got its start as a graphic novel. In fact, it was very, very close to getting greenlit at a couple different publishers just as the pandemic hit, and at least the comic industries put pause on everything for like a year and a half. And by the time it was unpaused, I had moved on, the publisher had moved on. But so the story is the main character, Thea Watts. She's the daughter of one of the founders of the astro mining movement. Like her dad was one of the astro mining pioneers when humanity just, like, we were running out of, in my world, we were running out of rare earth elements. So, once again, we were at the precipice of our technology pausing, our advancement pausing, because we
Similar
need these
theme.
things to fuel our technology. Yeah, you see the theme coming back around. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot about human progress and how we get to the places we get to. But so we as a species venture out, and we need to get these rare earth elements. We wouldn't dare have our technological progress pause. So we establish a moon base, and we create a fleet. And like I said, it's like deadliest catch in space. There's like national operations that are going out there trying to catch asteroids and mine the rare earth elements out of them. And then there's independent operators. So you have a little bit of an amazing race kind of situation going on, where you have conglomerates versus indie operators out there all trying to make a buck by astro mining. And the main character's dad is one of the pioneers there. And he leaves, he ultimately dies and leaves his daughter this astro mining rig on the moon. So, she can go up there, and it's a bit of a found family story where she goes up there with intending to get rid of this thing that took her dad away from her when she was a kid, and ultimately falls in love with it and decides to chart her own path out there among the stars, and finds a family out there to do it with her, assembles a crew, and goes after the big guys as the underdog kind of in this astro mining race. So that was kind of the setup. I love the idea of a little bit of a Firefly type feel to it, with a found family, a little bit of us versus them, with big like national well-funded conglomerates against the scrappy kind of startup, and all of it taking place in the moon, and then figuring out the how do we catch these asteroids, and how do we mine the rare earth elements out of them. That became the fun part. That became again, that's where for me, the deadliest catch, that this crab fishing thing that we do here on the planet was so fascinating to me. I kind of stole bits and pieces of that world and stuck it out there in space. So like, we use harpoons to catch the asteroids, and we have these little miner bots that go down and do the actual mining. They're very crab-like. So it's a fun little thing, but the focus is really on this startup crew trying to make their way in a world where you have big national conglomerates trying to squash them. So that's kind of the premise. And then as a second, like as a B story, there's a group of people on the planet that hate the fact that we're become slaves to our technological progress, and they're trying to stop it. So they are opposed to astro mining in general, are doing everything they can to stop what's happening. So you have those opposing forces of the scrappy crew going up against the big guys in the game, but then also this outside force that's trying to stop everything because they believe we're becoming slaves to our technology. And that's the setup for what becomes a very very windy story of these people and their job.
So you've got the Firefly heroes against the plutocrats on the one hand and the Luddites on the other.
Yeah.
and then they duke
You
it
got
out.
it. You nailed it.
And I'm assuming there's some good guys and bad guys and twists
Oh yeah,
and turns.
good
Yeah.
guys and bad guys. Yeah, friends become enemies, enemies become friends. All the good stuff that you you get in a tale. Hey man, look, if you're writing a trilogy, that was, I wanted to write a couple standalones. Again, my how I was plotting out my own life. I wanted to write a couple standalones. Did that. I wanted to not only, now that I tackled the novel, tackle a trilogy. I wanted to see what that would be like. How it is to take 4 or 5 years and write an extended narrative over 3 books, and how you connect it all together and make it all wrap into a tight bow. And so that's where I'm at. And what I've discovered about a trilogy is it takes a lot of work. I mean, uh, you have to, the things that are going to happen in book 3, you have to set the stage for in book 1. So things can be literally separated by 150,000 words, and if you don't get the first bit right, you can't do the second bit. So it's a juggling act, and it's a lot of fun. So I'll be happy to be done with it. I will admit I'm about halfway through the 3rd book, and I have a deadline for myself to get it done in the spring. And I'll be happy to put it aside, because I've been living with these characters for about 5 years, and they're sick of me and I'm sick of them.
So how do you get that work-life balance? You're a busy guy. You're burning the midnight oil for our bulldog friend Brian, who we mentioned at the start. Homage again to him.
Yeah.
You're a busy Madison Avenue ad agency mofo. So how do you do a speculative science fiction book?
Luckily, I have 2 adult children, so that helps. They
Yeah.
they have their own things, so I have my nights and weekends back to myself again after decades of not. And I don't know. I think that again, during the pandemic, I learned to just be very disciplined about my time. I'm not a social media guy. I still treat my phone as like a phone, and so I leave it in my office at the end of the day. So I don't have that drawing my attention. So I stick to a schedule. I get up in the morning. I write before the workday starts for an hour or two, and then if I have some free time at lunch, I'll peck away or do some editing, and then try to hit it again in the evenings. Not on any kind of a religious schedule. I'm not a guy who like tries to crank out a certain word count every day or every week. I don't do that. But when it's writing time, I write, and I don't let myself be distracted. So it's worked so far. So I'm just sticking to it.
Are you Mozart or Beethoven? And by that I mean Mozart would see it in his head and no edits. They've seen his original music sheets and there are hardly any edits. The dude just would see it and out it would come and he'd be done. And Beethoven was the exact opposite. Hundreds, thousands of drafts with the black page with ink everywhere. You could see him bleeding into his scores.
Yeah, I'm more of a, well, I mean, so I'm a plotter. I plot my stories out, versus what people call the pantser. You just kind of like Stephen King is a pantser. He sits down, he's got an idea in his head, and he just follows the story wherever it's going to take him. I could never do that.
That's kind of me.
Yeah.
I have a general idea. I see the key milestones in the story, almost as abstract vignettes. And I'm a very visual person, even though I'm very nearsighted. I'm very, very so I see scenes, often devoid of context, and these become milestones. So I know I'm like a frog leaping lily pads to get from one to the other, and I know where I'm going, and I just need to steer the characters in that direction, and off they go. And then I cannot plan. There's no way I could plan.
Yeah, see, I'm the exact opposite. I plan it all out. Before I write word 1, I literally have all the major beats for all the chapters mapped out on index. Yeah,
we are truly diametrically opposite. You know who's a lot like you? James Elroy. Do you know James?
Yeah,
L.A. Confidential.
Yeah.
He before he writes a book, he has an outline which is as long as the book.
Oh no, I'm not that
So,
bad.
but he's the extreme of that. He
Yeah,
plans everything out, and the
yeah.
very last thing he does is actually write the prose.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I'm not that bad. I have every chapter kind of on an index card, and I have on the card the beats that I want to hit in that chapter, and then
Wow.
like a notes to myself, like make sure by the end of the chapter this is set up. Like, and that's it. And then I do that for every chapter, so I can see the whole book in card form on my
You're
whiteboard.
storyboarding.
Yeah,
It's like a comic strip. You're
exactly.
storyboarding it out.
I storyboard the whole thing out, and some people like cringe at that. They think like, well, that's going to take away all the creativity, and that's at least in my experience, that's not the case because inside of that planning, like again, the characters and the story is going to go where it needs to go. But for me, it's freeing because like I can just follow the kind of blueprint that I set out for myself. It'll change. I mean, and that's why I do an index because I'm constantly ripping these things up and throwing them away and renumbering them because but it gives me a baseline from which to operate so that, and this also, I think, gets back to your question about how do I fit it in. Like, if I didn't have that, then I wouldn't be able to say, oh, I got 45 minutes now during my lunch break. I'm going to go back into that spot. It's easier to do when you have it mapped.
I'm really impressed by people who do things very, very different than me. Because to me, it's like an alien language. It's like for example, I'm inept as a handyman. I could maybe screw in a light bulb, but fix a sink or do
Yeah.
anything. I'm hopeless, absolutely hopeless. So my nephew, he turns houses, buy a rundown house and refurbish it. They turn houses. He could do everything. He could put in kitchen cabinets. He could redo plumbing and wiring. And I'm like, wow, would I ever in a million years want to do any of that? No, but I'm so deeply impressed by the capacities that are beyond my wildest
Yeah.
imagination of Mookie doing it. And the way you write your novels is like that.
It,
That, and I
it,
think it's terrific. I think it's awesome. And what happens with me is I compromise my financial security because I get overwhelmed with my own bullshit. That's number one. Number two is I cannot create these little slices of time for working on the novel. Either I'm in it to win it like a maniac because it's all swimming around and there's nothing planned and everything is just coming out, or it's shut down. I've got my characters on ice waiting for me to finally be financially irresponsible enough to bring them to life.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, I get it. I just wish, I mean, there's days I wish I could just kind of let it go like that. It probably goes back to the way I started in this whole thing, like you said, with writing comics. Everything's got to be very, very carefully constructed and plotted out before you move because you've got only a very finite amount of space that you have to accomplish a lot of things in. So it's just what works for me. And I think for me, the benefit is like by the time I get done that first draft, my first drafts tend to be a lot cleaner than a lot of people's. Like I do like the first draft and I'm editing as I go through and then I'll do a second draft where I will really tighten down the bolts. But since I've stuck to my blueprint and adjusted along the way, I'm not making at that point like big kind of developmental structural storytelling changes. It's mostly just tightening things up a little bit. And so after two drafts with this blueprint kind of strategy I use, it's in a pretty good shape. And then I'll do a third where I really just get into the nitty gritty and it's mostly because I'm terrified of my editor, this editor that I talked about. Like I'm terrified of sending him something really shitty. Like so I agonize over that last draft, and it doesn't prevent him from finding thousands of things that are wrong, literal thousands of things that he tweaks during his pass. But I'm just terrified of sending him something bad and him saying, "That's it. I'm never reading another thing that you write." So that's the one I really agonize over. But because of the blueprint structure that I use, my first couple drafts tend to be pretty tight.
I have another eccentricity that I picked up after years of creative writing, blogging, and it's kind of like an Axios.com meets the Iliad approach. And what I've landed on is a very obsessive compulsion with symmetrical sentences. So one of the challenges that I've had as a writer over the years is that if you're a painter, you've got a canvas and you've got some square footage to work with. And there's the canvas and there's what's outside the canvas, and that's it. And then you've got your color palette, and then you go for it. With writing, it's linear. And there's no set boundary for when you begin and end anything. It's up to you. It's up to your own taste, your abilities, and the demands of the narrative. This bothered me for a long, long time because it's ad hoc, it's arbitrary, and it lacks structure that I sometimes crave. Ironically enough, I don't want to plan anything, but when it's down to the level of syntax, I like poetry.
Yeah.
It goes back to the iambic pentameter of Shakespeare, which is da-da, 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 da-da. And sometimes they do a costume change that would take a few minutes longer, and they would tell the bard to write another soliloquy because they need a couple minutes. And then da-da, 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 da-da. So it became modular and scalable, even the Elizabethan plays. So what I adopted over years of writing, and it began on Medium when I was a blogger, through the CMS of Medium, even though, it's a serifed font and the word numbers are going to vary, I started writing symmetrical blogs and short stories. So this story will have every paragraph that's 5 lines, and each section will have 10 paragraphs.
Wow.
And I wrote an entire novella like that. And what that forced me to do on the syntactic level was to write and rewrite. And then it created ideas I normally wouldn't have because it gamified my writing process.
Yeah.
This next paragraph only has 2 lines. I need to either add 3 or eliminate it. And I need to rewrite this paragraph 5 times to make it fit.
Wow.
And if this section went to only 9 paragraphs, I need to add 1 more, which created a new idea, which precipitates a bridge I never thought about. So I'm constantly oscillating between syntax and semantics in this lyrical kind of prosody kind of way.
Yeah.
So I arbitrarily picked my margins. I chose 3-line paragraphs for my novel, and the entire novel is written in religiously held 3-line paragraphs.
Wow.
They're between, I think, 170 and about 190, 195 characters each.
Wow.
And it looks cool on the page. I spent a lot of time getting the formatting right, so they match in these blocks. So when you flip through the novel, there's these symmetrical blocks of prose, which are only broken up by dialogue, which is less than 3 lines. And no dialogue ever goes beyond the verboten 3-line limit. So when you read my novel, it's like Axios.com. It's like the websites and news flashes, and it's like tweets. And I'm actually tweeting the book in reverse on Twitter.
Wow.
So you can read it. So it's boom, 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 boom. It's a staccato, non-stop driving.
Yeah.
And each paragraph I wrote and rewrote to make it not only 3 lines, but as interesting and compelling as I could, so that it almost stands alone. You could do bibliomancy and flip to any random page, pick a paragraph, and it's its own little kind of self-contained poem.
Wow. That's awesome.
Isn't that kind of weird?
It's really, it's super weird, but it's also really kind of compelling. And I could see, like, once you get hooked into the, because every reader, they go through this instantaneous kind of like discovery as soon as they flip open a book. And you're going to figure out hopefully you're going to figure out what the writer's up to right out of the gate. And it could just be they're up to nothing except for telling a story the way you've read thousands of stories. But every once in a while, it'll be in reverse order, or it'll be something like you're describing. And you get that moment where the reader's like, I'm in or I'm out, right?
Yes.
And I think for the people who are in, what you're describing could be really compelling. It'll be the thing that kind of propels them through the pages. And I think that's a really interesting strategy to take.
Yeah, thanks. And it was fun as hell to write. Very
Yeah,
difficult, but it was super fun. And what this modular and scalable Lego piece approach did was it made editing and changing sections
yeah,
seamless and inviting. So normally if you're moving stuff around, you need to break paragraphs and you need to worry about continuity. And what I would do would be I'd just yank these 3-line Lego pieces, move them around. And then if I did that, I would add another couple as a segue. And it gave me this almost programmer's agility for moving within my own narrative and flexing as I was finalizing it.
yeah. I mean, that's pure writing for you, man, and that's going to show up on the page. Like if you had a great old time doing that, your people are going to realize it. They'll see it. They'll feel it in the word.
And then my protagonist, Antihero, I would write a 3-line paragraph about this guy, and then it wouldn't really fit. It would be too short or too long. So I'm always wrestling to get in that 170 to 195 character range because I'm stuck with that. I got to do it.
Right.
And in that process of refurbishing every paragraph, I made him a shittier and shittier person.
Poor bastard's a slave to the form.
Yes, and I applied that to pretty much all the characters. Which how can I dial it up? It forced me to edit and re-edit and micro obsess over hyperbolic descriptions and characters and situations.
Well, it's going to force you to make choices, right? I mean, that's the thing. It's like I think that's the biggest downfall, especially a downfall of especially new writers, is being super verbose. Like being too. Yeah, I mean that is a problem. I'll tell you the story of like when I got my agent. He's a guy I had reached out to in the past and with no success because querying is awful. I mean, just trying to find a literary agent's a really awful process. It's almost an impossible process, quite frankly. But I happened to notice that it seemed like he hung out his own shingle and kind of left his agency. And I just happened upon that on Substack or something like that. So I reached out to him again, and whatever I happened to say, like it clicked, and he said, well, tell me about your story. And that went off from there. But I think the thing that actually hooked him in is before he asked, I could tell he was intrigued. And then the last thing that hooked him in before he said, okay, send it to me, was he said, well, how long is it? He goes, because I love my, and he said, I love my sci-fi, but I want to know how long it is. And my response was, well, the first book is, all 3 books are designed to be about 65,000 words because that seems to be where readers really like. That's the length that readers are willing to tolerate.
Each one is 65K.
Yeah. Because that's about, a 275 page book.
Right.
And, anything under 300 is going to be appealing to the average reader. Right. And that's when he was like, he knew I was thinking of the reader and the end user here. And I was making choices as a result of that. And I think that was the thing that made him say, okay, send it to me.
Right.
And then ultimately said he wanted to represent me. So like, I think it was that. It was the fact that if you don't force yourself to make choices, that's pitfall number 1. So I think what you've just described is maybe the extreme version of making choices, but I think that's going to go a long way because it certainly seems that you have a plan for that, and that's going to appeal to a lot of people, I think.
Yes, serious brevity and succinctness.
Yeah.
Many writers, especially to your point, younger writers or novice writers, will go on and on with descriptions, piling adverbs on top of adjectives, and it just goes on and on. I didn't have room for that.
No.
I can't go past 195 characters in any sequence. So I was always forced to STFU.
Yeah.
And I had to make a choice. Does it warrant going to another paragraph? And if it went to another paragraph, it's got to be in that same range.
Yeah. And it's got to be worthy of the space you're taking up.
Exactly. So that made it super fun for me. And The feedback I've gotten is some people are put off by it just because it's so alien, but other people enjoy it because they could read it in bits and pieces. In the same way you write, other people can read my book because in addition to these 3-line bursts, I do sections, and each section is anywhere from a minimum of 3-4 pages to maximum 8 or 9.
Yeah.
So the whole book is in these chunks within chunks. It's kind of a fractal reading experience.
That sounds super cool.
Pick it up and you read, and then you can just kind of go for it, like our digital age, where attention spans are minimal.
That's everything, right? That's everything. Yeah. I know. I mean, thinking of the reader, I think is all my writer friends, it's a thing that we talk about a lot. Like, we all love the idea of just writing for ourselves and creating our structures and our people and our plots and our worlds. But I think that that's great. But at some point, if you have to think about the reader, I mean, if your goal is to put stuff out there that you want people to read, if you want it to be read widely, if you want it to be read by, a certain section of fandom or whatever, then you have to think about them. You have to think about the things that they want, the things they're consuming, the places they're consuming it. Not that it's going to drive your decision making, but you have to have an awareness of it, I think. I had a discussion with a friend recently, and he's trying to break. He's more of a short story writer for like literary magazines, and when I was reviewing some of his stuff, I told him, I was like, you got to think of the end user, man. Like, this story that you're telling me, what you like, I think he was rubbing against the fact that he was writing, quote unquote, literary stories. And I was like, where are you going to send these? And if you're going to send it to the Atlantic, for instance, that has a certain readership, and you should know what that readership is. You can't send the Atlantic a science fiction space opera story. That's not who reads the Atlantic. I said, so you have to have an awareness of the readership to a certain degree, just so you're making smart choices, And I don't let it drive my decision making, but I do, like, back to the question of hard science fiction versus grounded science fiction. I know who I want to write to try and reach the widest audience I can, and I have no problem saying I'd love to reach a wider audience.
My own ego, I think, gets in the way of my own vision of the book that I want to read. And what I'm doing is I'm obviously emulating models. Like, my brain is kind of a GPT. It's pre-trained in the sense of Thomas Pynchon, William Gibson,
Sure.
Douglas Adams. I have a handful of influencers. And when you put it into the meat grinder, which is in between my ears here, then out pops my book. Obviously, it's through the filter of my own lived experiences, all my own uniqueness. But my audience is an amalgamation of the audiences of these other successful writers. And many of these writers were successful in another era, too. So I've got Isaac Asimov in there. I've got Hunter S. Thompson in there. I've got all these, and I'm not copying, but I have been pre-trained with models of their style, and it comes through me. So by transference, the readers of these writers would find something to resonate with in my book. The challenge, though, is it's this eclectic mix of bits and pieces of these audiences, of these styles, in a unique expression that might very well create a what the fuck reaction. But that's okay. I mean, let's play it by ear and roll with it. This became self-evident when I went to LA Comic-Con. I don't know if you've bookbarked before, where you set up a table and you sell your books at a fair or a live event. Have you done that?
No, I've never. I've been to Comic-Cons when I was doing comic writing, but mostly doing signings or being on panels. Like, I've never done the bookbarking bit, but I imagine it must be just really hard. That's another reason I haven't.
It's grueling, absolutely grueling, but so eminently worthwhile. I just love that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So even though I have this introverted secluded artist doing his own crazy bullshit attitude, I'm also very social. I have
Yeah.
kind of this dichotomy. So I love going out there and hear the world smashed together. So I have this weird science fiction book with the 3-line paragraphs with a quirky cover drawn by my niece. And I'm sitting there with science fiction writers who have a very similar attitude to yours, which is the covers are exciting and welcome and very much contemporary science fiction.
Yep.
And the whole marketing engine was there. So I saw it in action.
Yeah.
A former podcast guest invited me to share her table at LA Comic Con, Ingrid Moon.
Oh.
And it was gracious of her. And I actually helped sell her book too, because I'm a pitch guy like you. I'm a marketing guy. So she had a book, Bio Hunter. And when people would come to the table, she would spend 1 or 2 minutes telling them what the story was. And I said, hey, sweetheart, get to it. Your book, Bio Hunter, is Hunger Games in a Fallout universe. And she's like, it's kind of like that. So when people would flow by, she'd go, hey, you into Hunger Games? And then people would turn and then goes, well, here it's in a Fallout setting. And they'd be like, oh, okay. So I helped her a little bit, but she was the one rocking it. She sold 10 times as many books as I did, like an order of magnitude, for all the reasons you described, where a book has to have a flashy cover.
Yeah.
It's got to have a great story that's not too complicated and weird. And when you open up the book, it's got to look like all the other books they've read. They'd open up mine and they're like, what is this?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, again, it comes down to a question of audience, and we haven't even talked about like we've talked a little bit about the packaging of these things, but like
it's very important.
And one of the biggest obstacles I found, especially if you don't put some capital behind it, is like, how do you market these? Like, once you write this thing and you have a wonderful cover and it's professionally edited and all the other things that you mentioned, like, how do you get it out into the world? And there you're relying on things like Amazon and Meta to draw attention to it. So it's like they also need to have reviews. Like that is one of the biggest obstacles, I think. Like people talk about self-publishing all the time, or indie publishing, and it's, it is an obstacle in and of itself. But when you put a book out there onto Amazon, like, I mean, think about like when you go buy socks on Amazon. I don't know about you, but I type in men's socks, I sort by number of stars, and whatever, pair of socks has got 10,000 4.5-star reviews, those are the ones I buy. That's just the economy today. So you can have the greatest book in the world, but if you can't get attention to it and get people clicking those stars or giving you little reviews, it'll just disappear. It becomes invisible.
And it's a cat chasing its own tail, or eating its own shit, whichever way you want to look at it. How do you get stars and reviews? Well, people need to buy the book. How do people buy the book? Well, if they see that there's stars and reviews.
Yeah, it's such a game, and I think for me, I was fortunate because my first novel was reviewed by Kirkus, and it got a starred review. And I remember getting the review back and from Kirkus and reading, and I was like, oh, that's pretty positive. And then at the top, it had like a little star next to the thing, and I had no idea what it meant. I didn't know what a starred Kirkus review was. Well, here they give it to a very, very few percentage of the books they review gets a starred review. And that little thing that I was even completely unaware of, that review economy, set that book off. I mean, it was the single thing that kind of got lot of attention and sent it out there into the world, and then it got picked by Kirkus as a book of the year for them. So like, this is a part of the industry that people don't really know, is that the review economy does drive a lot of this too. So like, it's not, people think of like indie publishing as an easy thing, but it's, there's a lot of forces that you have to understand, and a lot of things have to swing your way to kind of break out of that 100,000 or whatever the number was that you mentioned earlier on. It's very easy to just disappear into invisibility on Amazon, the mighty Zon. If you could have the most professional package imaginable, but if people aren't reading it, if it doesn't find that readership and get people giving you some stars and some external outlets giving you some reviews, it'll just vanish. And that's counter to people who want to have like a wider readership. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of, I always advise new writers who are trying to go down this route that, be sure that that's the way you want to go. Otherwise, take the time and the money that it's going to cost you to do all that, and then maybe try and go the traditional route, get yourself an agent and see if you can get it out there.
I'm happy, if only because I pleased myself. If I would have killed myself for a year and I would consider the output garbage, then I would have the worst of both worlds. But I have my own self-satisfaction, and I maybe even more significantly, I'm super pumped for the sequel. This is a series. So the first one's like 120,000 words. I think the second one is at least that much, and that's just kind of the intro to the expansive story that's floating around in abstract form in my bald head. So my happiness factor is through the roof. What's my ROI? In nothing or very little or negative, but I'm Pollyanna. I'm kind of like, just do what you love to do, enjoy every damn day, and then see what happens.
Well, if you're measuring your ROI in happiness and joy, then it seems like you're doing very, very well, and that's got to be a part of it. I mean, if this just became a second career, another job, then why the hell would we do it? I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't need a second job.
That's what I tell people. It's like, why are you writing?
Yeah.
If you're writing to be famous and to be another Harlan Cohen, then good luck, buddy. I mean, it's like you have a shot, but you got a way better chance of being way happier and way richer rolling in crypto or starting a hedge fund or go work in an ad agency like we do.
Don't tell them that. Yeah. But clearly the advertising and marketing background has been central to any success I've had, because it's a thing that scares the hell out of a lot of people. And for me, it's just another day at the office, literally. So that again, I'm very fortunate in that regard. I was able to take this step forward with having I didn't have a lot to learn in that regard.
That's terrific. And when does the third book come out in spring?
Well, it's a weird space that I'm in right now because, like I said, my agent has, even though the first two books of this trilogy are available now through Amazon, that's what he's submitted. He's submitted the trilogy out to a bunch of publishers.
If you go the indie route, publishers are like, well, you're either an indie hit or you're not. And if you're an indie hit, stay an indie hit. And if you're not, then why am I even talking to you?
That's exactly right. It's a weird sweet spot. There's a bit of a micro trend right now of the publishers picking up indie hits and then republishing them under their flagships. So I guess that's what we're hoping for. Like that's
good luck.
Yeah, I mean we'll see what happens. It just started, but the weird position that puts me in is I know that if that were to happen and the book were to be picked up by one of the big five, then edits would have to be made. The likelihood of it, not only is the likelihood slim that it would get picked up, although it's gotten some good traction. If it did get picked up, I'm sure whatever editor is going to put their fingers on it, they're going to want some changes. So here I've got two books that are kind of done, quote unquote, but that might change as a result of landing with a new imprint. So how do I make progress on the third one, knowing that the first two might have to change? So I'm in a bit of a weird spot. I think I've kind of concluded I'm just going to try and get like the first draft of it done. That way I have a starting point, and then I'll just put it aside for a little while and see how the journey goes with being out there on submission. If nothing happens, no harm, no foul. Like I said, the first two are already out. I'll dust up the third, send it to my put it out in the world next year. But we'll see. Yeah, so it's actually a very enviable spot to be in. A lot of people, they'll write a book, they'll work for years to get an agent, then they'll work for years with that agent to get the book in shape, and then they'll submit it, and then if it gets picked up, they'll work for years with the editor to get it in shape. Meanwhile, it's one book, and then it still may never see the light of day. Exactly.
I'd rather sell crypto or burn more agency hours than do that. There's just no way.
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna get.
The big dream is repurposing into, the proverbial Netflix mini series or the sci-fi channel. Who knows, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of how I did my stint in screenwriting, is because that graphic novel I mentioned before, my first thing, my buddy and I that I co-wrote that with, we created a TV pilot out of it and submitted it to some film festivals, and sure enough, it was a finalist at a film festival, and it didn't ultimately win, but it landed us an agent out there, and then we wrote a subsequent, like another TV pilot, and and thus, and ended up doing some spec writing for a big Hollywood producer. None of which ever made it, because Hollywood is a cold and heartless place, but it was because of the how do you take one thing and turn it into something else? And comics are, I mean, look, you can't throw a cat and not hit a movie made out of a comic. It seems like comics are the springboard for basically all of Hollywood these days. So I got a little experience with that, and I got enough experience with that to know that I never want to do that again. Talk about a grist mill. Like I don't want to write screenplays anymore.
I really want to turn my sci-fi novel into a graphic novel. And when I was at LA Comic-Con, I imagined that I had 50 grand in my pocket to burn, and I was just appraising the different comics. And I found one comic, Don Aguilo. He's located in San Francisco, and he is the Johnny Fazuli style. That's my protagonist's name. And I spoke to him, and we signed an NDA, and we're like talking about potentially working together. But I don't know if I have the wherewithal or funds, but it's tantalizing to think about repurposing. They want to
find an artist that's willing to work with you, and they may ask for like some piece of the project, some percentage.
Right. And that I would be happy to do. I think I would very much be happy to do. And it's just great talking to him. It was great to get to know him, and I want to invite him on the pod.
So if you can get that piece taken care of, and the one thing for comics is there's places where you can send it as an unagented submission. Like you could put a package together, follow the submission guidelines for like Image Comics, which is one of the big. They'll take unagented submissions, and they just want to file the package. They're really hard to get through, but you can do it. I mean, if you have an artist that's like, yeah, you can give it a whirl. Like if you don't want to give up any part of your intellectual property, you have to pay an artist to do it. And, that's where it's hard. That's where it's hard, because they're all the really good artists are really booked.
This guy's busy. It took forever to just get an email from him. So that's a sign to me that he's good. Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I was pitching a comic project out there, and I wanted to work with a really great artist. So I reached out to, and luckily through my work, I was able to get in contact with some really top tier talent in the industry. And I remember talking to this person, Fiona Staples, and she's the co-creator of a comic called Saga with Brian K. Vaughan. And Brian K. Vaughan did he wrote for Lost. He's one of the big guys. And I remember reaching out to her, and she was super gracious. She's like, Lou, your pitch sounds really great. I am booked for the next 6.5 years on a comic project. So like, I'd like to work with you, but like, do you want to secure, me for 6.5 and plus 1 month out from now? Or do you it's really hard. So you can find an artist that matches your vision and they're willing to like partner with you, then give it a whirl, man. Why not? Yeah, give it a whirl.
Speaking of scheduling, I'd love to have you back and have a conversation about your launch and do a launch talk. If it's spring of 2026 or whatever, and catch up.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love that, and hopefully by then I'll have some answer.
Right, you'll know whether you're going to go mainstream or not. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So yeah,
awesome.
that would be wonderful.
Ladies and gentlemen, science fiction fans, Lou Iovino. Thank you for joining us. Like, comment, share.
Thank you. This was super fun. Thank
I'm
you.
gonna put all your links for your goodies, your website, anything else you like in the podcast description.
Okay.
And people can reach out, get your books.
Sounds great. I would love it.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank
You're
you.
the best.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.